Welcome to Agatha Christie Tales. Tonight, we journey through the frost-touched lanes of the English countryside to Whitmore Hall, where old money breeds older resentments, and the morning light will reveal a darkness no amount of inherited silver can dispel. Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, has been summoned by an anxious letter, a plea wrapped in the language of propriety. Captain Hastings accompanies his friend, expecting perhaps a quiet weekend of country air and tedious conversation. Neither man suspects that before the breakfast gong sounds, murder will have already claimed its victim. Join us for Murder Before Breakfast, a tale of family secrets, bitter inheritance, and the poison that flows through bloodlines as surely as through crystal decanters. This mystery unfolds in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this enigma emerges from our own imagination. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Whitmore Hall. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, its cream-colored envelope bearing the unmistakable weight of quality stationery. I watched Poirot examine it with the care one might reserve for a suspect's alibi, turning it over twice before slitting it open with his silver letter knife. "Hastings," he murmured, his eyes scanning the elegant script within. "We are invited to the country." "Splendid," I replied, setting down my newspaper. The London fog had been particularly oppressive that November, and the prospect of fresh air held considerable appeal. "A social visit? Non, mon ami." Poirot's mustache twitched, never a promising sign. "A consultation. Lady Whitmore writes with, how shall I say, controlled desperation." He passed me the letter, and I read it with growing interest. Lady Honoria Whitmore, widow of the late Admiral Whitmore and mother to the current baronet, requested Monsieur Poirot's presence at Whitmore Hall in Sussex. The matter, she wrote, was delicate, a family matter. She feared, though she did not specify what precisely she feared, that something terrible was about to occur. "Rather vague," I observed. "Precisely why it intrigues me." Poirot folded his hands across his waistcoat. "The English aristocracy, they do not write to Hercule Poirot for trivial matters. When they overcome their pride sufficiently to seek help, the situation is already grave." And so, 3 days later, we found ourselves in a hired motor car, winding through lanes where frost still clung to the hedgerows despite the pale afternoon sun. The driver, a taciturn local man, had informed us we were approaching the Whitmore estate. "There, sir," he said, pointing with a gnarled finger. "Whitmore Hall." The house emerged through a stand of bare oaks, a Georgian manor of considerable proportions, its honey-colored stone, mellowed by 2 centuries of English weather. It was handsome rather than beautiful, dignified rather than welcoming. The windows caught the dying light, reflecting it back like watchful eyes. "Impressive pile," I remarked. Poirot made a small sound of acknowledgement, but his attention was fixed on something else. The figure standing at the entrance, waiting for our arrival with obvious impatience. We were met at the door not by a butler, as I had expected, but by a woman of perhaps 35, dressed in practical gray wool that spoke more of efficiency than fashion. Her face was pleasant but unremarkable, the sort of face one might pass in a crowd without a second glance. Her hands, I noticed, were in constant motion, smoothing her skirt, adjusting her collar, clasping and unclasping before her. Monsieur Poirot?" Her voice was steady, though something flickered behind her eyes. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. My mother is expecting you. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Mademoiselle Whitmore." Poirot bowed with continental courtesy. "The journey, it was most pleasant. The English countryside, even in November, possesses a certain melancholy charm." Eleanor Whitmore's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "You're very diplomatic, monsieur. This way, please. I've had fires lit in the drawing room." She led us through an entrance hall dominated by portraits of Whitmore's past, stern naval officers, corseted ladies, and one particularly unpleasant-looking gentleman in Elizabethan dress who seemed to follow our progress with painted disapproval. The drawing room offered more comfort than the hall had promised. A generous fire blazed in the marble hearth, and the furniture, while antique, had been arranged for warmth rather than formality. Seated in a high-backed chair near the flames was Lady Honoria Whitmore. She was a woman of advanced years, but undiminished presence. White hair swept back from a face that had once been beautiful and remained commanding. She wore black, whether from recent bereavement or habitual preference, I could not immediately tell, and a single strand of pearls that had probably been in the family since the Regency. "Monsieur Poirot." She did not rise, but extended a hand weighted with rings. "You came. I confess I wasn't certain you would. When a lady writes with such urgency, how could I refuse?" Poirot pressed his lips briefly to her knuckles. "You honor me with your confidence." "Confidence?" Lady Whitmore's laugh held no warmth. "Is that what we're calling desperation these days? Eleanor, ring for tea, and tell your brother we have guests. He should make an appearance, however disagreeable he finds the obligation." "Which brother?" Eleanor asked, her hand already on the bell-pull. "Both of them. This concerns the whole family." As Eleanor departed, Lady Whitmore gestured for us to sit. I settled into a comfortable armchair, while Poirot chose a straight-backed seat that allowed him a clear view of both, the door and our hostess. "Now, Lady Whitmore," he said, his voice gentle but probing. "Your letter, it spoke of fears, of something terrible that might occur. You must tell me everything." For a moment, the old woman's composure wavered. Her fingers, thin and spotted with age, gripped the arm of her chair. "It's my son," she said. "Sir Roland. He is not a good man, Monsieur Poirot. I say this as his mother, who loves him despite everything. He is cruel, suspicious, and vindictive. He has made enemies of everyone in this house, his wife, his children, his sister. Even the servants despise him. And you fear one of these enemies may act upon their hatred? I fear the tension has become unbearable." Lady Whitmore's gaze drifted to the fire. "There was an incident last week. Roland's coffee, he takes it black, no sugar, precisely at 11 each morning, made him violently ill. He accused the cook, but Bessie has been with us for 20 years. She would never. The coffee was tampered with? Roland believes so. He has been vigilant since, suspicious of everything he eats or drinks. The atmosphere in this house has become poisonous, Monsieur Poirot, metaphorically and perhaps literally." The door opened and Eleanor returned, followed by a young maid bearing a tea tray. Behind them came two men who bore sufficient resemblance to mark them as brothers, though little else united them. The elder was tall and dark, with the lean, hungry look of a man perpetually dissatisfied with his lot. His evening clothes, though well cut, showed signs of wear at the cuffs. This, I learned, was Marcus Whitmore, the eldest son who had been disinherited 3 years ago for reasons that remained unclear. The younger was his opposite in almost every respect. Fair, slightly soft about the middle, with an amiable expression that suggested a man more comfortable with books than with conflict. Philip Whitmore, the second son, who had inherited nothing but his father's disdain. "The famous detective," Marcus said, not bothering to mask his contempt. "Come to save us from ourselves, have you?" "Marcus." Lady Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. "Mind your manners." "My manners are the least of this family's problems, Mother." But he subsided into a chair near the window, as far from the family group as the room allowed. Philip approached Poirot with an extended hand and a nervous smile. "Forgive my brother, Monsieur Poirot. We're all rather on edge. I'm Philip. I look after the estate accounts, what remains of them." "A pleasure, Monsieur Philip." Poirot shook his hand, studying him with those sharp green eyes. "And the accounts? They are troublesome?" Philip's smile flickered. "The estate is not what it was, but that's hardly a matter for a detective. On the contrary, Hercule Poirot is interested in all matters. The financial health of a household often reveals much about its emotional health, n'est-ce pas?" Before Philip could respond, the door opened once more, and a woman swept in with the brittle energy of barely contained fury. She was beautiful, striking even, with auburn hair arranged in the latest fashion and a green silk dress that would not have been out of place in a Mayfair drawing-room. But her beauty was hard-edged, her movements sharp, and her eyes, when they fixed on us, held the calculating assessment of a card player sizing up an opponent. "So you're Poirot," she said, not waiting for introduction. "I'm Vivian Whitmore, Roland's wife, though for how much longer, I couldn't say." "Vivian?" Lady Whitmore's shock was genuine. "Oh, don't pretend, Honoria. Everyone knows I'm planning to leave him. The only question is whether I'll manage it before he changes his will to cut me out entirely." She dropped onto a sofa with deliberate grace. "Is that why you've summoned a detective, Mother? To catch me in the act of—" "What, exactly? Wanting to escape this mausoleum?" "I summoned Monsieur Poirot," Lady Whitmore said coldly, "because I believe someone in this house means to kill my son." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Eleanor's teacup rattled against its saucer. Philip went pale. Marcus let out a harsh laugh. And Vivian? Vivian smiled, slow and dangerous. "Well," she murmured, "that does narrow the list of suspects, doesn't it, to everyone who's met him?" It was at this moment that Sir Roland Whitmore himself appeared in the doorway. He was a large man, imposing in the way of those accustomed to dominating every room they entered. His features were heavy, his brows thick, his mouth set in a permanent expression of displeasure. He surveyed the assembled company with the air of a judge preparing to pronounce sentence. "What's this?" His voice was a deep rumble, accusatory. "A tea party? I wasn't informed we had guests." "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," Lady Whitmore said with pointed calm, "and Captain Hastings. I invited them." "Poirot?" Sir Roland's eyes narrowed. "The detective. Why?" "Because someone has been tampering with your food, Roland. Because this household has become a powder keg. And because I would rather bring in a professional than attend your funeral." For a long moment, father and mother locked eyes in silent combat. Then Sir Roland snorted, a sound of contempt that seemed his default response to opposition. Waste of money, he declared. There's nothing wrong in this house that a firm hand won't cure. But if it amuses you, Mother, let him poke about. He'll find nothing but the usual petty grievances of people who resent their betters. He turned to Poirot, and something ugly moved behind his eyes. Don't expect cooperation from me, monsieur. I don't believe in your foreign mumbo-jumbo about psychology and the criminal mind. Good English justice is what's needed here, and if I discover who tampered with my coffee, they'll answer to the magistrate, family or not. With that, he stalked from the room, leaving a silence thick, enough to cut. Poirot sipped his tea with apparent serenity. "A most charming gentleman," he observed mildly. Marcus Whitmore laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "You have no idea, Monsieur Poirot, no idea at all." I looked around the room, at Eleanor's trembling hands, Philip's ashen face, Vivian's predatory smile, and Marcus's bitter amusement, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November evening. Lady Whitmore was right to be afraid. The question was not whether violence would erupt in this household, but when, and whether Hercule Poirot could prevent it. Chapter 2. Death at Dawn. Dinner that evening was an exercise in barely concealed hostility. Sir Roland presided at the head of the table, his presence casting a pall over the meal, despite the excellence of the cook's efforts. He ate methodically, tasting each dish with theatrical suspicion before consuming it, and drank only from a decanter that Eleanor had opened in his presence. "You see how I must live," he announced to the table at large, though his words were clearly intended for Poirot. "A prisoner in my own home, surrounded by those who would see me dead." "Roland, really?" Lady Whitmore's voice was weary. Must we what, Mother? Speak the truth?" He jabbed his fork toward Marcus, who sat rigid with suppressed fury. "That one threatened to kill me not 3 months ago, in front of witnesses. Didn't you, boy?" Marcus's knuckles whitened around his wine glass. "I said I wished you were dead. There's a difference." "A legal distinction only. The sentiment remains." Sir Roland turned his attention to Vivian. "And my loving wife, who thinks I don't know about her consultations with divorce solicitors. Tell me, my dear, have they explained how little you'll receive once I alter my will?" Vivian's smile was ice. "I'm counting the days until I can afford to stop caring, Roland." "Charming, simply charming." Sir Roland's gaze swept to Philip, who was doing his best to become invisible behind his soup. "Even my spineless second son, who embezzles from the estate accounts and thinks I haven't noticed." "Father, Philip's protest died under his father's contemptuous stare. "Save your denials. I have the ledgers. We'll discuss it tomorrow, after I've spoken with the family solicitor." He paused, letting the threat settle. "All of you would benefit from my death. The only question is which of you has the nerve to attempt it." Through all of this, Eleanor sat quietly, eating little, her eyes fixed on her plate. She said nothing, drew no attention. When Sir Roland's glass required refilling, she performed the service silently, receiving not even a glance of acknowledgement from her brother. Poirot, I noticed, watched her with particular interest. "Mademoiselle Eleanor," he said, during a lull in Sir Roland's tirade, "you manage the household, do you not?" She looked up, startled to be addressed. Yes, I oversee the domestic arrangements, the staff, the menus, that sort of thing. A demanding position. Someone must do it." A flicker of something, resentment, resignation, crossed her plain features. "Vivian has no interest, and Mother's health doesn't permit such exertion. And you have held this role for how long? 15 years, since Father died and Roland inherited. She paused, and her voice softened. Since I had no other prospects. Sir Roland snorted. Eleanor's one useful function. She runs the house adequately enough, saves me the cost of a proper housekeeper. The cruelty was casual, almost offhand, and somehow more devastating for its lack of heat. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but I saw her hand tremble slightly as she reached for her water glass. After dinner, the family scattered, Marcus to the billiard room, Vivian to her chambers, Philip to the library. Sir Roland announced his intention to retire to his study for his nightly cocoa and private papers. I work late, he informed Poirot. The estate requires constant attention, especially with a thief for an accountant. Eleanor brings my cocoa at 10:30. She is the only one I trust to prepare it. She knows that any irregularities would see her turned out without a reference. A wise precaution, Poirot murmured. Wisdom is survival, monsieur. Remember that. Sir Roland fixed the detective with a hard stare. You may snoop as you please tomorrow. Question the servants, examine the grounds, peer into whatever corners amuse you. But you'll find nothing. The danger in this house is not hidden. It sits at my dinner table every evening, wearing the faces of my family. He departed, and I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Good Lord, I muttered to Poirot. What an absolutely frightful man. Oui. Poirot's expression was thoughtful. Frightful indeed, and yet Hastings, consider, a man so odious, so deliberately provocative. Does he invite his own destruction, or does he perhaps know something that makes him believe himself safe? Safe? He's clearly terrified. All that business with the decanter, the suspicion. Terrified, yes, but terrified of the right person? Poirot shook his head slowly. That, mon ami, is the question that troubles me. We retired early, pleading fatigue from our journey. Our rooms were in the east wing, comfortable if somewhat cold, with windows overlooking a frost-silvered garden. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the silence of the countryside after London's constant noise. I do not know what time I woke. The room was dark, the fire reduced to embers. Some sound had disturbed me, a cry, perhaps, or the slamming of a door. I lay still, listening, but heard nothing more. Eventually, I dismissed it as a dream and drifted back to sleep. The scream came at 7 o'clock. I was in the midst of shaving when it pierced the morning quiet, a single, high shriek that cut off abruptly. I dropped my razor, seized my dressing gown, and rushed into the corridor. Poirot emerged from his room at the same moment, impeccably dressed despite the hour. His expression was grave. Hastings, come. We followed the sounds of commotion to the ground floor, where a cluster of servants had gathered outside the study door. A young maid, the same girl who had brought tea the previous afternoon, stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, her face the color of whey. Eleanor Whitmore pushed through the group, her voice sharp with authority despite its tremor. Everyone stand back. Sarah, stop that noise at once. Someone fetch Dr. Paulson. He's staying in the village. Quickly. She turned and saw us. Something flickered in her eyes. Relief, perhaps, or calculation, before she schooled her features into careful blankness. Monsieur Poirot, thank God, it's Roland. She stopped, swallowed. You'd better see for yourself. She opened the study door. The room was handsomely appointed. Leather chairs, walls lined with books, a substantial mahogany desk positioned before tall windows. A fire had burned low in the grate, leaving the air chill. The curtains remained drawn, admitting only thin blades of gray morning light. Sir Roland Whitmore sat in the chair behind his desk. At first glance, one might have thought him asleep. His head rested against the chair's high back, his eyes closed, his hands folded across his stomach. A half-empty cup of cocoa sat at his elbow, its contents long cold. But no sleeping man possessed that waxy pallor. No living body sat with such absolute, terrible stillness. Poirot approached with measured steps, bending to examine the dead man without touching him. His nostrils flared slightly. "The smell of bitter almonds," he murmured. "Very faint, but unmistakable. Hastings, observe the position of the cup." I looked. The cocoa cup sat precisely in the center of a small side table, its handle turned at an exact right angle to the desk's edge. "He was particular about such things," Eleanor said from the doorway. She had not entered the room. Roland liked order, everything in its place. And yet? Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping the desk. Papers lay scattered across its surface, accounts, letters, documents in apparent disarray. His papers, they are not orderly at all, most curious. A sound from behind us announced the arrival of the family. Vivian appeared first, wrapped in an emerald dressing gown, her face carefully composed. Behind her came Philip, still in his night clothes, his expression cycling through shock, fear, and something that might have been relief. Marcus was last, fully dressed as though he had not slept at all. Lady Whitmore descended the stairs with the support of a cane, her face a mask of aristocratic control. But her eyes, when they found her son's body, betrayed her. "Roland," she whispered. "Oh, Roland." "He's dead," Vivian said flatly. "Obviously murdered. I suppose we're all suspects now." "Vivian." Philip's voice cracked. "For God's sake, show some feeling." "Why? He never showed any to us." But she turned away, and I saw her hands shaking. Marcus stood apart, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Who found him?" "Sarah." Eleanor moved to close the study door, blocking the servant's view. She came to open the curtains and light the fire, as she does every morning. The door was locked from inside. She had to fetch the spare key. "Locked from inside?" I repeated. "Then how—" "An excellent question, Captain." Poirot's voice was soft but carried. "One of many we must answer. But first, no one must enter this room. The evidence, it must be preserved. When the doctor arrives, he will confirm what we already suspect, that Sir Roland was poisoned, most likely with cyanide or a similar compound." "The cocoa," Philip breathed. "Someone poisoned the cocoa." "So it would appear." "Eleanor made the cocoa." All eyes turned to Marcus. His voice was cold, precise. "She makes it every night. She's the only one he trusted." The color drained from Eleanor's face. I made it as I always do. I brought it to him at 10:30. He was alive, working at his desk. I said good night and left. I never—" "Easy, mademoiselle." Poirot raised a calming hand. "No accusations have been made. We are merely establishing facts. You brought the cocoa at 10:30. Did you observe anyone else near the study? Hear anything unusual?" Eleanor pressed her fingers to her temples. Marcus was in the billiard room. I heard the balls clicking as I passed. Vivian had already gone upstairs. Philip was in the library. I saw light under the door. Mother retired early, as she always does. The servants were in their quarters. "And after you delivered the cocoa?" "I went to my room. I read for a while, then slept. I heard nothing until Sarah screamed this morning." Poirot nodded slowly. The study door, you say, was locked from inside. How is this possible if the killer was not in the room? There's a window, Philip offered. Behind the desk, perhaps. Poirot crossed to the heavy curtains and drew them aside. The window was a tall sash design, latched securely from within. Latched, he observed, not forced, and the drop to the ground outside is considerable. This does not appear to be the method of entry or exit. Then how? Vivian demanded. Roland wasn't fool enough to take poison voluntarily, and if the door was locked and the window sealed, how did the murderer escape? Ah. Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. But you assume, madame, that the murderer was in the room when your husband died. What if the death, it occurred much earlier than we suppose? What if the locked door, the orderly scene, they are, how do you say, staging? Staging? Marcus's voice sharpened. What do you mean? But Poirot did not answer. He had bent over the body again, reaching carefully into the pocket of Sir Roland's smoking jacket. When he straightened, he held a pocket watch, a handsome gold piece on a matching chain. Observe. He held it up. The glass is cracked, and the time, it has stopped. We gathered closer. The watch hands pointed to 11:47. 1:45 to midnight, I said, but Eleanor delivered the cocoa at 10:30. That's over an hour. Précisément. Poirot tucked the watch carefully into his own pocket. The cocoa was delivered at 10:30. Sir Roland was found dead this morning, but the watch, it tells us that something occurred at 11:47 last night, something violent enough to crack the glass. A struggle, perhaps? A fall? Or the moment of death, Lady Whitmore said quietly, when his heart stopped and he slumped forward, striking the desk. Perhaps. The doctor will help us establish the time of death more precisely. But this watch, it is our first clue, and clues, they do not lie. The local doctor arrived within the half hour, a young man named Paulson, nervous but competent. He confirmed what Poirot had suspected. Sir Roland had been dead for many hours, certainly since the previous evening. The cause, pending further examination, appeared to be poison, most likely prussic acid or one of its compounds. The cocoa? I asked. Possible. Dr. Paulson peered at the cup's cold contents. Though the quantity of poison required for such rapid death would likely have been detectable. The taste, the smell. Cyanide has a distinctive, bitter almond odor that's hard to mask. Unless he did not drink the poisoned cocoa at all, Poirot said thoughtfully. Unless the poison, it was administered by another method entirely. What other method? He wasn't shot or stabbed? Patience, mon ami. The little gray cells, they are working, but they require more data before they can reach their conclusions. He turned to address the assembled family, his manner shifting from contemplative to authoritative. Mesdames et messieurs, I must ask you to remain within the house today. Each of you will speak with me privately. You will tell me exactly where you were last night, what you saw, what you heard. You will tell me the truth. For I warn you, Hercule Poirot, he has a sense for lies. They offend him greatly. And if we refuse? Marcus's challenge was direct. You have no official authority here. That is correct, but I act at the invitation of Lady Whitmore, whose home this is. And I suspect the police, when they arrive, will be most interested in the full cooperation, or lack thereof, shown by each member of this household. Marcus held Poirot's gaze for a long moment, then looked away. Fine, he muttered. Ask your questions. I have nothing to hide. Vivian laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Oh, Marcus, we all have something to hide. That's rather the point, isn't it?" Eleanor stood silently by the door, her hands clasped before her, her face a study in careful blankness. When Poirot's gaze found her, she met it without flinching. "I will tell you everything I know, monsieur," she said quietly. "My brother was a difficult man, but he was my brother. I want his killer found. And found they shall be, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Of that you may be certain." As the family dispersed, each to their separate vigils of grief or guilt or calculation, I found myself staring at the closed study door and the dead man behind it. "Poirot," I said quietly, "who do you think—" "It is too early for thinking, Hastings." He tugged at his mustache, his expression distant. "Now is the time for seeing, for listening, for understanding the shape of this household's secrets." He paused, and something flickered in his green eyes. "But this much I tell you, mon ami. The murder of Sir Roland Whitmore was not an act of sudden passion. It was planned, prepared, executed with precision, and the killer, they are here among us, close enough to touch." I shivered, and not from the morning cold. The hunt had begun. Chapter 3. The Morning Interrogations. Poirot commandeered the morning room for his interviews, a pleasant space facing east, where pale winter sunlight filtered through lace curtains, and a fire crackled in the grate. He arranged 2 chairs facing each other, with a small table between them bearing a pot of his preferred tisane. "The setting, Hastings. It is important," he explained, adjusting the chairs until they sat at precisely the angle he desired. "The suspect must feel neither too comfortable nor too threatened, a delicate balance like a soufflé. And my role? You will sit by the window, unobtrusive but present. Take notes if you wish, but more importantly, observe. Watch their hands, their eyes, the small movements they cannot control. These tell us more than words ever can." I settled into the indicated position, notebook ready, as Poirot rang for the first interview. Marcus Whitmore entered with the air of a man approaching a duel. He threw himself into the chair opposite Poirot without waiting to be invited, crossing his long legs and fixing the detective with a challenging stare. "Let's get this over with," he said. "I know I'm your prime suspect, the disinherited son who threatened his father publicly. Very convenient." "You do not deny the threat, monsieur?" "Why should I? Half the county heard me say it. Roland had just announced his intention to cut me from the will entirely, not merely reduce my portion, but eliminate it. After everything I'd sacrificed for this family." Marcus's jaw tightened. I lost my temper. I said I wished he were dead. I meant it, but wishing and doing are different things. "Tell me about last evening, after dinner." "I went to the billiard room. Played alone for an hour or so. Couldn't face company. I heard Eleanor pass by around 10:30 on her way to Roland's study with his precious cocoa. Then I went to bed." "You saw no one else? Heard nothing unusual?" Marcus hesitated, a fraction of a second, but Poirot noticed. I saw his eyes sharpen. "No, nothing." "You hesitate, monsieur. Why?" "It's nothing. Imagination, probably." Marcus uncrossed his legs, recrossed them. "Around 11, perhaps a bit later, I thought I heard voices from the direction of the study, but it might have been the wind, or the servants, or—" "Voices? More than one?" "I couldn't be certain. The billiard room is at the far end of the corridor. Sound carries strangely in old houses." "Could you distinguish words, recognize the speakers?" "No, just—" Murmurs. A rise and fall. It stopped after a few minutes, and I didn't think any more of it. Marcus leaned forward, his composure cracking slightly. Look, I didn't kill my father. God knows I had reason enough, but I didn't. He was changing his will today. Did you know that? Having his solicitor down from London to make it official. By tonight, I would have been completely disinherited. Why would I kill him before that happened, when his death now means I might still inherit something? Poirot tilted his head. An interesting point. You believe the current will still favors you? I have no idea what the current will says. Roland kept it locked in his desk. Marcus stopped abruptly. The desk with the scattered papers, Poirot murmured. Tell me, monsieur, was your father a tidy man? Obsessively so. Everything in its place, every paper filed, every pen aligned. It drove us all mad. Yet this morning, his papers were in considerable disarray. Marcus frowned. Were they? I didn't notice. I was rather focused on his being dead. Poirot said nothing, merely gazed at Marcus with those penetrating green eyes until the younger man shifted uncomfortably. Is that all? For now, monsieur. You may go. Marcus rose, then paused at the door. My father was a monster, Monsieur Poirot. I won't pretend grief I don't feel, but whoever killed him, I almost want to shake their hand. His mouth twisted, though I suppose that doesn't help my case. On the contrary, Poirot said softly as the door closed. Honesty is always helpful. It is so much rarer than one might wish. Vivian Whitmore swept in next, trailing expensive perfume and deliberate elegance. She had dressed with care, black silk that managed to be both mourning appropriate and devastatingly flattering, and her makeup was flawless despite the early hour. Monsieur Poirot. She arranged herself in the chair with practiced grace. I'll save you some time. Yes, I hated my husband. Yes, I was planning to divorce him. Yes, I would benefit from his death, though not as much as you might think. Roland's money is tied up in the estate, and I suspect he's modified the will to leave me nothing but debts. So you see, his dying now is actually rather inconvenient. You are very forthcoming, madame. I'm practical. Lies require energy, and I've wasted enough of that on this marriage. She extracted a cigarette from a gold case and lit it without asking permission. What do you want to know? Your movements last evening. After dinner, I went directly to my room. My maid Clotilde can confirm. She helped me undress and prepare for bed. I took a sleeping powder around 10 o'clock and slept until that wretched girl's screaming woke me. You heard nothing during the night? Not a thing. The powders are quite effective. She exhaled smoke in a thin stream. My room is in the west wing, monsieur, as far from Roland's study as one can get while remaining in the house. That was not accidental. You and Sir Roland, you did not share a bedroom? We haven't shared a bedroom in 3 years. Her smile was bitter. We barely shared a civil word. Our marriage was a business arrangement from the start. My family had connections, his had money. When the connections proved less valuable than anticipated, the arrangement soured. You mentioned your husband was modifying his will. Constantly. It was his favorite weapon. Threatened to disinherit one of us, watch us scramble, enjoy the power. Vivian's fingers tightened on her cigarette. Marcus, Philip, even Eleanor. He played us all like puppets. Whoever cut the strings did us all a favor. Including yourself? Especially myself. She met Poirot's gaze directly. But I didn't kill him, monsieur. I wouldn't know how to administer poison if my life depended on it, and frankly, I lack the nerve for murder. Divorce was my exit strategy, messy, expensive, but legal. Tell me about the other members of the household, their relationships with Sir Roland. Vivian's eyes glittered with malicious amusement. Where to begin? Marcus, you know about the prodigal son, cast out for daring to marry a woman Roland considered beneath the family. The marriage didn't last, but Roland's grudge did. Philip. She paused. Poor, weak Philip. He's been embezzling from the estate for years, small amounts, hoping Roland wouldn't notice. But Roland noticed everything. And Mademoiselle Eleanor? Something flickered across Vivian's face, too quick to identify, but Poirot saw it. Eleanor, the invisible sister. She runs this house like clockwork, and Roland treated her like a servant. Worse than a servant, at least he paid the servants. Vivian stubbed out her cigarette with unnecessary force. She's been here 15 years, monsieur. 15 years of thankless labor, while Roland promised her a settlement eventually, and never delivered. He was planning to bring in a professional housekeeper. Did you know that? Some efficient woman from London. Eleanor was to be pensioned off to a cottage in the village, with barely enough to live on. She knew of this plan? Roland announced it at dinner last week, in front of everyone. The humiliation. Vivian shook her head. Eleanor just sat there, didn't say a word. But her face, for just a moment I saw something in her face that frightened me. What did you see, madame? Vivian was silent for a long moment. Hate, she said finally. Pure, distilled hate. Then it was gone, and she was asking if anyone wanted more potatoes. She rose, smoothing her skirt. I've told you what I know. Whether it helps, I couldn't say. But if you're looking for someone with motive and opportunity, Monsieur Poirot, I'd look more closely at the one who poured his cocoa every night. Philip Whitmore was a stark contrast to his brother and sister-in-law. Where they had projected defiance and calculation, he radiated barely controlled anxiety. His hands trembled as he sat, and his eyes darted about the room like those of a trapped animal. Monsieur Whitmore. Poirot's voice was gentle, almost paternal. You are distressed. Please, take a moment. I'm sorry, Philip pressed his palms against his thighs, trying to still their shaking. This is all rather overwhelming. Father dead, murdered, and everyone looking at everyone else, wondering. You managed the estate accounts, I understand. The trembling worsened. Yes, for the past 8 years, since Father's eyes began to fail, he could no longer read the small figures. And Sir Roland mentioned at dinner last evening certain irregularities. Philip's face crumpled. He knew. Of course he knew. He always knew everything. I never took much, a few pounds here and there, to cover debts, gambling debts if you must know. I've been trying to stop, truly I have, but the creditors. He drew a shuddering breath. Father was going to have me arrested, today. After the solicitor amended the will to cut me out, he was going to call the police. That is a powerful motive for murder, monsieur. Don't you think I know that? Philip's voice rose, then fell. But I didn't do it. I couldn't. I spent the whole evening in the library, trying to work out how to beg for mercy. I must have drafted 20 letters of apology, all of them useless. I didn't leave until well after midnight. You remained in the library until after midnight. Yes, I couldn't face going to bed, couldn't face the morning. Eventually, exhaustion won out and I went upstairs. The house was completely silent. You passed by the study? Philip nodded. The door was closed. I didn't notice anything unusual, no light from beneath the door, no sounds. I assumed Father had gone to bed. At what time was this? 12:30, perhaps? I didn't check my watch. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Monsieur Philip, I must ask you something important. The scattered papers on your father's desk. Could any of those papers have been the financial records? The accounts you managed? Philip went very still. I don't know. I didn't look closely. Why? It is possible that the killer searched those papers, looking for something, or perhaps wishing to destroy evidence of something. The accounts are kept in a separate ledger, in the estate office, not the study. Philip's brow furrowed. Father had copies, though. He kept copies of everything important in his desk. And if those copies showed the embezzlement, then whoever killed him might have taken them. Philip's eyes widened as the implication struck him. You think someone killed him and stole the evidence? To frame me? I think nothing yet, monsieur. I merely gather facts. Poirot sat back. One more question. Your sister Eleanor, you are close to her? Eleanor? The question seemed to surprise him. I suppose so. She's always been kind to me, kinder than I deserved. When I was struggling with the gambling, she lent me money from her own savings, never told Father, never reproached me. He searched for the word. Good, genuinely good. It's rather rare in this family. She did not resent her position in the household? If she did, she never showed it. Eleanor doesn't complain, doesn't make demands. She just carries on. Philip's expression softened. She deserved better than this, better than being Roland's unpaid servant for 15 years. And now that he is dead, what becomes of her? I don't know. It depends on the will, I suppose. But knowing Father, he probably left her nothing but platitudes. Philip rose, his anxiety momentarily replaced by something like anger. She gave up her life for this family, Monsieur Poirot, her youth, her prospects, everything, and Father repaid her with contempt. After he left, Poirot sat in thoughtful silence. I watched him, recognizing the expression, the slight frown, the unfocused gaze, the fingers tapping rhythmically against the arm of his chair. Hastings, he said at last, what do you observe? They all have motive, I replied, and they're all accusing each other, but nobody has a clear alibi. Everyone claims they were alone, asleep, or occupied. Précisément, and yet one testimony interests me greatly. Marcus hearing voices? That, yes, but more. The universal portrait of Mademoiselle Eleanor. She is described as good, invisible, long-suffering. Everyone speaks of her sacrifice, her kindness, her patience. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But recall, Hastings, what Madame Vivian said. That moment at dinner, when Eleanor's true feelings showed through. The hate that vanished as quickly as it appeared. You think, Eleanor? I think we must speak with Mademoiselle Eleanor herself, and with the servants who know the household's secrets. He rose, straightening his waistcoat with characteristic precision. But first, I wish to examine the study more thoroughly. The scattered papers trouble me, Hastings. A man of obsessive order does not die with his desk in disarray, unless someone created that disarray after death. Searching for something? Or concealing something? Poirot moved toward the door. Come, mon ami. The little gray cells. They hunger for more data. The study had been sealed, awaiting the police inspector from Brighton who was expected by early afternoon. But Lady Whitmore's authority and Poirot's reputation secured us entry, with strict instructions to touch nothing. In daylight, the room revealed details I had missed. That morning, the Persian carpet, slightly rumpled near the desk, the cold fireplace, with ash that had been disturbed, and the papers, dozens of them, scattered across the desk and floor as though someone had rifled through them in haste. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes cataloging every detail. He knelt by the carpet, examining the disturbed fibers. He peered into the fireplace, extracting a fragment of charred paper with his handkerchief. "Someone burned documents," he murmured. "Recently. The ash is still fresh. The killer? Or Sir Roland himself, before he died?" Poirot studied the fragment. "This edge, it bears part of a signature, the letters E-L-E. My heart sank. Eleanor? Perhaps, or relevant, or 11th. We must not jump to conclusions, Hastings." But his expression was grave as he pocketed the fragment. He moved to the desk, studying the scattered papers without touching them. Account books, letters, legal documents, all in apparent disorder. Yet, as I watched Poirot's eyes move methodically across the chaos, I sensed he was seeing a pattern I could not perceive. "The cocoa cup," he said suddenly. "It remains where it was?" I looked. The cup still sat on the small side table, its dregs cold and dark. "It has not been touched," I confirmed. "Good. I wish the police to test its contents. But I tell you now, Hastings, I do not believe the poison was in that cocoa." "Then how?" "The timing is wrong. The symptoms of cyanide poisoning are rapid. Minutes, not hours. If Sir Roland drank poisoned cocoa at 10:30, he would have been dead before 11. Yet his watch stopped at 11:47, suggesting he was alive and struggling nearly an hour and a quarter later. Perhaps he didn't drink the cocoa immediately. A man of rigid habits who takes his nightly cocoa at precisely the same time every evening, for years. Nah, Hastings, he would have drunk it immediately." Poirot's gaze swept the room once more. "The poison came from elsewhere, another source, another moment. And the cocoa? It is a distraction. How do you say? Redfish. Red herring. That is what I said." He straightened his cuffs. "Come, it is time to speak with Mademoiselle Eleanor. And I suspect, Hastings, that this conversation will be the most important of all." Chapter 4. Beneath the surface. We found Eleanor Whitmore in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of luncheon with the same quiet efficiency she apparently brought to everything. The cook, a stout woman named Mrs. Bessie Thornton, deferred to her with the ease of long practice, while a young kitchen maid chopped vegetables under Eleanor's watchful eye. "Mademoiselle Eleanor." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Might I trouble you for a private conversation?" She looked up, unsurprised. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I've been expecting you." She wiped her hands on her apron, a practical gesture that somehow emphasized her servile position in a household where she was, by blood, the master's sister. "Mrs. Thornton, please continue without me. The soup needs another 20 minutes." She led us to a small sitting room off the main corridor, a modest space furnished with worn but comfortable chairs and a writing desk piled with household accounts. Her private domain, I realized, the only corner of Whitmore Hall that belonged to her. "Please, sit." She gestured to the chairs, then perched on the edge of the desk, her hands folded in her lap. It struck me that she had not taken the most comfortable seat for herself, a habit, perhaps, born of years of self-effacement. "You manage this household with great skill," Poirot observed. "The staff, they respect you. They're good people. It's not difficult to earn respect when you treat others decently." A ghost of a smile crossed her plain features. Something my brother never understood. You speak of Sir Roland without affection. Should I pretend otherwise?" Eleanor's voice was calm, without rancor. Roland was not an easy man to love. He was not a kind man or a generous one. But he was my brother, and I served him faithfully for 15 years. Whatever my personal feelings, I did my duty. And that duty included preparing his nightly cocoa. Yes, she met Poirot's gaze directly. I know how that looks. I know I'm the obvious suspect. The spinster sister who poured his drink every night. Who else could have poisoned it? And did you, mademoiselle? The question hung in the air. Eleanor did not flinch. No, Monsieur Poirot. I did not kill my brother. She paused. Though I confess there were moments when I wished him dead. Many moments, over many years. Does that shock you? It would shock me more if you claimed otherwise. The life you have led in this house, it cannot have been easy. Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at being understood. No, it was not easy. When our father died, Roland inherited everything. I was given a choice: marry whomever Roland approved, or remain here and make myself useful. I had no dowry, no prospects, no skills beyond household management. I chose to stay. And the suitors your brother approved were men who wanted connections to the Whitmore name, not a wife. Her voice hardened slightly. Roland made certain of that. He paraded me before fortune hunters and elderly widowers, knowing I would refuse, knowing each refusal bound me more tightly to this house. He needed me, you see, a housekeeper he didn't have to pay. He was cruel to you. He was cruel to everyone. But yes, to me especially. Perhaps because I was the only one who couldn't leave. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. Last week, he announced his intention to replace me, a professional housekeeper from London, with proper training and references. I was to be retired to the gardener's cottage with a pension of £40 a year. This was distressing to you? Distressing? For the first time, emotion cracked through Eleanor's composure. I have given this family 15 years, monsieur. My youth, my prospects, my entire adult life. I have managed every servant, balanced every household account, nursed my mother through 3 illnesses, and my reward was to be cast out like a worn-out shoe with barely enough money to survive. She stopped, drew a breath, regained control. Forgive me. You asked about my feelings. Now you know them. Poirot nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, mademoiselle. It is refreshing. Now, tell me precisely what occurred last evening. Eleanor's account matched what she had told us earlier. After dinner, she had supervised the kitchen's cleaning, then prepared Sir Roland's cocoa herself, as she did every night. She had carried it to his study at 10:30, found him working at his desk, set the cup at his elbow, and bid him good night. He acknowledged you? Barely, a grunt. He was reading something, a letter, I think. He seemed agitated. Agitated? In what way? Eleanor considered. Tense. His jaw was tight, and he kept tapping his finger on the desk. I assumed it was about the will. He'd been obsessing over the changes he planned to make. Did you see the letter he was reading? Only a glimpse. Heavy cream paper, typed rather than handwritten. It looked official. A solicitor's letter, perhaps. And after you left the study? I went to my room, read for a while. A novel, nothing improving. I heard the clock strike 11, then 1:30, then midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I took a small measure of brandy from the bottle I keep in my room. I finally dozed off around 1 o'clock. You heard nothing unusual during this time? No voices, no movements? Eleanor hesitated. The pause was fractional, but Poirot noticed. Mademoiselle? It's probably nothing. She uncrossed her ankles, recrossed them. Around 11:45. I remember because I had just checked the clock. I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my room. Quick, light footsteps, a woman's tread. Could you identify whose? I assumed it was Vivian. Her room is at the end of the west wing, and she sometimes wanders at night when she can't sleep. But I didn't open my door to check. The footsteps, they were going toward the study or away from it. Another hesitation. Toward. But the west corridor doesn't lead to the study. One would have to go through the main hall. Eleanor shook her head. I don't see how it could be significant. Everything is significant until it is not, mademoiselle. Poirot's voice was soft. One more question. Your brother's nightly routine. The cocoa. Did anyone else have access to the kitchen during its preparation? The kitchen is busy until 9 o'clock, when the servants finish their supper. After that, it's usually empty. I prepare the cocoa around 10:15. I heat the milk, add the chocolate powder, pour it into Roland's special cup. His special cup. A porcelain cup with the Whitmore crest. He was particular about it. Would drink from no other. It stays in the kitchen cupboard between uses. And last night, was anyone else in the kitchen while you prepared the cocoa? Eleanor's brow furrowed. Yes, actually. Philip came in while I was heating the milk. He said he wanted a glass of water. We chatted briefly, about nothing important, the weather, I think, and then he left. Before or after you poured the cocoa? Before. The milk was still warming. She looked at Poirot with sudden alarm. You don't think Philip? I think nothing yet, mademoiselle. I merely collect facts. Poirot rose, his manner signaling the interview's end. You have been most helpful. Please remain available. I may have further questions. Eleanor stood, smoothing her practical gray skirt. Monsieur Poirot, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe I killed my brother? Poirot regarded her steadily. I believe, mademoiselle, that you had ample motive. I believe you had opportunity. I believe you possess the intelligence and the self-control to commit such a crime. He paused. But I also believe that the evidence, so far, does not support such a conclusion. The little gray cells, they see contradictions, puzzles that do not yet resolve. What contradictions? The timing, for one. The poison, if it was cyanide, acts within minutes, yet your brother appears to have lived for over an hour after drinking the cocoa. This suggests either that the cocoa was not poisoned, or that he did not drink it until much later than his usual time. Eleanor's face registered surprise. I hadn't thought of that, but Roland was rigid about his routine. He would have drunk it immediately. Précisément. Which leads me to consider a third possibility, that the poison was administered by another method entirely, and the cocoa is, as you English say, a red herring. Another method? But how? He ate nothing else, drank nothing else after dinner. I would swear to it. Perhaps. But you were not with him continuously, were you? After you left the study, he was alone. Anyone could have entered. The door was locked from inside, Eleanor reminded him. So we are told, but locks can be manipulated, mademoiselle, and the window, though latched, is not the only possibility. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Tell me, is there another entrance to the study? A servant's passage, perhaps? Eleanor went very still. Mademoiselle? There is a passage, she said slowly. I'd forgotten. We never use it anymore. It connects the study to the old butler's pantry, from the days when the family took breakfast in the study and needed service access. The door is hidden behind a bookcase. Hidden? It's designed to blend with the shelving. You wouldn't notice it unless you knew it was there. Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. And who in the household knows of this passage? The family, certainly. Roland, myself, Marcus, Philip, Lady Whitmore, though she rarely uses the ground floor anymore. Vivian. Eleanor frowned. I don't know if anyone told Vivian. She's only been part of the family for 8 years, and the passage fell out of use before she arrived. The servants? The older ones might remember. Mrs. Thornton, perhaps. She's been here 30 years. I shall speak with her. Poirot moved toward the door, then paused. One final thing, mademoiselle. The burned documents in the fireplace, the fragment I recovered bore the letters E-L-E. Does this suggest anything to you? Eleanor's face revealed nothing. My name begins with those letters, as does elephant, 11, and elegant. I cannot say what document was burned, monsieur, or by whom. You did not enter the study after delivering the cocoa? I did not. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most enlightening. We found Mrs. Thornton in the kitchen, supervising the final preparations for luncheon with the brisk authority of long experience. She was a solid woman of perhaps 60, with shrewd eyes and flour-dusted hands that never stopped moving. Monsieur Poirot. She acknowledged us with a nod, not pausing in her work. I wondered when you'd get to me. Sit there, if you like. I can talk and cook at the same time. Poirot perched on a stool by the great wooden table, watching her roll pastry with practiced efficiency. You have been with the Whitmore family for many years, madame. 32 years this spring. Started as a kitchen maid under old Lady Whitmore, Sir Roland's grandmother. Worked my way up. She thumped the rolling pin with emphasis. Seen a lot in this house, more than I'd care to remember. And Sir Roland? What was your impression of him? My impression doesn't matter, does it? He was the master. I cooked what he wanted, how he wanted it, and kept my opinions to myself. She glanced up, her eyes sharp. But since he's dead, and can't dismiss me for speaking ill, I'll tell you plain. Sir Roland Whitmore was the worst of the lot. Cruel, petty, suspicious, treated his family like servants, and his servants like dirt. Yet you remained in his employ. I remained in this house, monsieur. There's a difference. I served the family. Lady Whitmore, Miss Eleanor, the children when they were young. Sir Roland was an unpleasant necessity, nothing more. Miss Eleanor, you are fond of her? Mrs. Thornton's expression softened. That girl deserved better. She had a young man once, you know, before Sir Roland put a stop to it. A curate from the village, decent fellow, genuinely cared for her. But he hadn't 2 pennies to rub together, and Sir Roland sent him packing. Told him Eleanor wasn't interested, showed him a letter supposedly from her breaking things off. A forged letter? Must have been. Eleanor was heartbroken for months afterward. Never spoke of him again, but I'd catch her sometimes, staring out the window toward the village. Mrs. Thornton shook her head. That was 15 years ago. The curate moved to a parish in Cornwall, married someone else. Eleanor stayed here and withered. Poirot was silent for a moment, absorbing this. The hidden passage from the butler's pantry to the study, you know of it? Of course, used it myself in the old days, when the family took breakfast in the study. Haven't opened it in years, though. Sir Roland preferred the dining room, and the passage always was draughty. Is the passage kept locked? There's a bolt on the pantry side, old and rusty but functional. She paused her rolling. Why do you ask? You think someone used it last night? It is possible. The study door was locked from within, the window latched. If the killer did not enter through either of those, then the passage would be the only way. Mrs. Thornton's floury hands went still. Lord have mercy. I never thought. The bolt, could it be opened from the study side? No, it only works from the pantry. If someone entered that way, they'd need to unlock it first, go through, then... She trailed off, her face troubled. But the bolt was still drawn this morning. I checked when I came down to start breakfast. You are certain? Positive. Force of habit. I always check the locks and latches first thing. The passage bolt was secure. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then either the killer did not use the passage, or they locked it again after leaving. Mrs. Thornton met his gaze. Which means they were still in the house, still among us. Précisément, madame. Poirot slid off his stool. You have been most helpful. One last question. Were you in the kitchen last evening when Miss Eleanor prepared Sir Roland's cocoa? I was finishing up the washing, yes. I saw her make it, same as always. Heated the milk, added the powder, poured it into his fancy cup. Mrs. Thornton's brow creased. Mr. Philip came in while she was working, wanted water, he said, seemed nervous, kept looking at Eleanor, then looking away. Did he approach the cocoa? He came close to the stove, where the milk was warming, stood there chatting for a minute or two. Then he took his water and left. She hesitated. I didn't see him touch anything, but I wasn't watching closely. I was elbow deep in dishwater. Poirot thanked her and we departed, leaving the cook to her pastry and her troubled thoughts. In the corridor I seized Poirot's arm. Philip? I hissed. He was in the kitchen. He could have poisoned the cocoa while Eleanor was distracted. It is possible, Poirot acknowledged. And yet, Hastings, the timing still troubles me. If the cocoa was poisoned at 10:15 and Sir Roland drank it at 10:30, he should have been dead before 11. The watch stopped at 11:47, nearly 90 minutes later. Perhaps the dose was smaller, taking longer to work? Cyanide does not work that way, mon ami. It is swift and merciless. Poirot tugged at his mustache, frowning. No, I am convinced the cocoa was not the vehicle. The poison came from elsewhere, and we have not yet discovered where. Then, what do? We examine the passage, Hastings, and then... His eyes took on a distant look. I believe I must examine the body once more. Something nags at the little gray cells, something I have overlooked. Chapter 5. The Breakthrough. The butler's pantry was a narrow room off the main kitchen corridor, lined with shelves bearing the household's finest china and crystal. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through a single high window, and the air held the musty smell of disuse. There. Poirot pointed to the far wall where a tall shelving unit stood laden with soup tureens and serving platters. The passage entrance, I presume. I examined the shelves, seeing nothing unusual. It looks solid enough to me. Appearances, Hastings, are the criminal's greatest ally. Poirot ran his fingers along the edge of the unit, searching. A soft click, and the entire structure swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow doorway beyond. The passage was dark and cold, perhaps 3 feet wide, with stone walls that wept moisture, and a flagstone floor worn smooth by generations of servants' feet. Poirot produced a small electric torch from his pocket and played its beam along the length of the corridor. "It extends perhaps 40 feet," he murmured. "A direct route from pantry to study, avoiding the main house entirely." I peered into the gloom. No one could traverse this without leaving some trace, surely. Let us see. Poirot stepped into the passage, his patent leather shoes clicking against the stone. I followed reluctantly, suppressing a shiver at the damp chill. The torchlight revealed little of interest at first. Bare walls, cobwebs, the occasional scuttling spider fleeing our approach. But halfway along, Poirot stopped abruptly. "Observe, Hastings." He directed the beam toward the floor. I looked. The dust that coated the flagstones had been disturbed, not heavily, but perceptibly. Footprints, faint but visible, leading in both directions. "Someone has been here recently," I breathed. "Within the last day, I would estimate. The dust has not yet resettled." Poirot knelt, examining the prints with fierce concentration. Small feet, a woman's or a slender man's. And here, he pointed to a slight smudge against the wall. Someone brushed against the stone. There may be fibers. He produced a small envelope from his pocket and carefully scraped the smudge, collecting whatever traces remained. "We shall examine this in better light." We continued to the passage's end, where another door, this one a simple wooden panel, stood closed. Poirot tried the handle. "Locked from this side," he observed, "which confirms what Madame Thornton told us. The bolt secures the pantry entrance. This door, it locks from within the passage. But if the killer entered through the pantry, came through the passage, and entered the study, then they exited the same way and relocked the bolt behind them. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the torchlight. "Which means, Hastings, that at some point last night, this door was unlocked. Someone opened it from the study side." "Sir Roland himself?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone with access to the study. Someone who knew of the passage and wished to use it for private purposes." We returned through the passage to the pantry. Poirot paused at the entrance, examining the bolt mechanism with his torch. "Recently oiled," he announced. "See how smoothly it moves? The rust has been cleaned away. Someone prepared this passage for use. Hastings, this was not an opportunistic crime. It was planned with care." The police inspector from Brighton had arrived during our exploration of the passage, a florid man named Dawson, who regarded Poirot with the mixture of suspicion and grudging respect that English policemen typically afforded foreign detectives. "Lady Whitmore has explained your involvement," he said, not quite concealing his displeasure. "I'm prepared to share information, within reason, but this is a police matter now, Monsieur Poirot. I'll not have my investigation compromised by amateur theatrics. I assure you, Inspector, my methods are anything but amateur." Poirot's smile was pleasant but firm. "And I believe I have information that may prove useful to your investigation." He described our discovery of the passage and the footprints, which Dawson received with obvious interest despite himself. "We'll have the passage examined properly," the inspector conceded, "though I don't see how it changes things. The sister made the cocoa. The cocoa was poisoned. Open and shut, to my mind." "Ah, but the timing, Inspector. The timing does not support this conclusion." Poirot produced Sir Roland's pocket watch from his pocket. "This watch stopped at 11:47 last evening. The glass is cracked, suggesting a fall or struggle at that moment. Yet the cocoa was delivered at 10:30, over an hour earlier." So the poison was slow-acting. Cyanide is not slow-acting, Inspector. It kills within minutes. Poirot tapped the watch face. If Sir Roland drank poisoned cocoa at 10:30, he would have been dead before 11. Yet this watch tells us he was alive and moving at 11:47. The cocoa cannot have been the murder weapon. Dawson's florid face reddened further. Then what was? That, Inspector, is what I intend to discover. With your permission, I should like to examine the body once more. The inspector hesitated, clearly torn between professional pride and practical curiosity. Finally, he nodded. Dr. Paulson is with the body now, preparing it for transport. You may observe, but touch nothing without his approval. Sir Roland's body had been moved to a spare bedroom on the ground floor, laid out on the bed with a sheet drawn to his chest. Dr. Paulson stood by the window, making notes in a small book. Monsieur Poirot. He nodded greeting. I've completed my preliminary examination. The cause of death is consistent with cyanide, poisoning, the distinctive bitter almond smell, the pink discoloration of the skin. Time of death, I estimate between 11 and midnight last night. Between 11 and midnight, Poirot repeated. Not earlier? The liver temperature and rigor mortis suggest that range. Certainly not before 10:30. And yet the cocoa was delivered at 10:30, and Sir Roland was a man of rigid habits who would have drunk it immediately. Poirot approached the body, his eyes moving methodically over the dead man's form. If he consumed cyanide at that time, he should have been dead within 15 minutes, 10:30 to 11 at the latest. Paulson frowned. You're right, the timeline doesn't fit. Precisely. Which suggests either that Sir Roland did not drink the cocoa when it was delivered, which contradicts all testimony about his habits, or that the poison came from another source entirely. Poirot bent closer, examining Sir Roland's hands, his face, his neck. Suddenly, he stiffened. Doctor, if you please, the left hand. May I examine it? Paulson hesitated, then nodded. Poirot gently lifted the dead man's left hand, turning it to expose the inner wrist. There. His voice was soft with triumph. Do you see, Doctor? I moved closer. On the pale skin of Sir Roland's wrist, barely visible, was a tiny puncture mark, a single dot of reddened skin, like an insect bite. An injection, Paulson breathed. Good Lord, he was injected with the poison. Précisément. Poirot released the hand with care. The cocoa was a distraction, what you English call a red herring. The true weapon was a hypodermic needle, administered while Sir Roland sat at his desk, perhaps while he was distracted by conversation or documents. But who? Someone who had access to him after Eleanor left. Someone who entered through the hidden passage, or perhaps through the study door itself. Someone who knew that suspicion would fall upon the one who prepared his nightly drink. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The killer deliberately framed Eleanor, or wished it to appear so. Poirot's expression was troubled. But there is something else, Hastings, something that puzzles me greatly. He turned back to the body, studying Sir Roland's face with intense concentration. The injection mark is on the left wrist. For such an injection to be administered without Sir Roland's awareness or resistance, he must have been cooperative, unsuspecting. He did not struggle. The needle entered cleanly. Perhaps he was asleep? A man does not fall asleep in his desk chair before midnight, with papers before him and work to do. No. Poirot shook his head. He was awake and aware. yet he allowed someone close enough to inject poison into his wrist without raising an alarm. Someone he trusted, I said slowly. Oui, someone he trusted absolutely. Someone whose presence at his side, whose touch upon his arm, he would not question. The implication hung in the air between us. How many people in Whitmore Hall did Sir Roland trust? Inspector Dawson, Poirot said, turning to the policeman who had followed us to the room. I should like to examine the contents of Sir Roland's desk more thoroughly. In particular, I am interested in any letters or documents that may have arrived recently, and any items that may be missing. The study had been photographed and catalogued by the police, but the scattered papers remained where they had fallen. Poirot moved through them with delicate precision, sorting and examining each document in turn. Account books, household receipts, correspondence from the estate manager. He set each aside. Ah, what is this? He held up a cream-colored envelope, empty, with a London postmark dated 3 days prior. The letter Eleanor saw him reading, I said, the official-looking one. So it would seem. But where is the letter itself? Poirot searched the remaining papers, his frown deepening. It is not here, yet the envelope remains. Perhaps it was one of the burned documents? Perhaps? Poirot moved to the fireplace, kneeling to examine the ash more closely. Yes, I see fragments of cream paper among the debris. The letter was burned. But by whom? Sir Roland, before his death? Or the killer, after? He sat back on his heels, his eyes distant. I recognized the expression. The little gray cells were working. Hastings, he said suddenly. The will. What do we know of it? Sir Roland was planning to change it. The solicitor was coming today to make the alterations. Oui, and what changes was he planning? To disinherit Marcus completely, to cut out Philip for embezzlement, to reduce Vivian's portion, to pension off Eleanor with a pittance. And who would benefit from these changes? I considered. No one, really. Everyone loses. Précisément, everyone in the family loses. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But who, Hastings, benefits from the will as it currently stands, before the changes were made? I struggled to follow his reasoning. We don't know what the current will says. Sir Roland kept it locked in his desk. Indeed, the desk that was searched, the desk with scattered papers. Poirot rose, moving to the great mahogany piece that dominated the room. Inspector, the desk drawers, have they been inventoried? We've catalogued the contents, yes. Dawson consulted his notebook. Papers, account books, personal correspondence, a revolver, unloaded, and a locked metal box. A locked box? Where is it? Still in the drawer. We haven't forced it open yet, waiting for the solicitor to arrive with the keys. Poirot's eyebrows rose. The solicitor has keys to Sir Roland's private box? According to Lady Whitmore, yes. It's where he kept the original will and other important documents. I see. Poirot was silent for a moment. And this solicitor, when did he leave London? Yesterday afternoon. He stayed overnight in Brighton and was planning to arrive this morning. Dawson checked his pocket watch. Should be here within the hour, in fact. Excellent. I should very much like to speak with him. Poirot turned to me, his expression thoughtful. Hastings, we must review what we know. The injection mark changes everything. The killer was not simply someone with access to the cocoa. It was someone who could approach Sir Roland closely, touch his arm, without arousing suspicion. A family member. Almost certainly. And the passage, someone used it last night. Someone with small feet. Someone who knew the bolt had been oiled, the way prepared. "Eleanor has small feet," I said reluctantly, "and she knows the passage better than anyone." "She does, but so does Vivian, whose footsteps Eleanor heard in the corridor at 11:45. And so does Mrs. Thornton, who has been in this house for 30 years. Poirot paused. "And there is Philip, who was in the kitchen when the cocoa was prepared, who was nervous, according to the cook, who had reason to fear his father's wrath. But Philip's feet wouldn't be small enough. Philip could have worn different shoes, or had an accomplice." Poirot shook his head. "No, we must not leap to conclusions. The little gray cells require more data." He moved to the window, gazing out at the frost-silvered garden. "The letter from London, the locked metal box, the will that was about to be changed. These things are connected, Hastings. I feel it in my bones. And the injection, the poison. The method tells us much about the killer. They are intelligent, careful, medically knowledgeable enough to administer an injection cleanly. They planned this murder in advance, oiling the passage, arranging to be present at the crucial moment, preparing the cocoa as a distraction." He turned back to face me, his green eyes bright with certainty. "I know who killed Sir Roland Whitmore, Hastings. I have known, I think, since we first entered this house, but knowing is not proving. For that I need the solicitor's testimony and the contents of that locked box." My heart hammered. "Who, Poirot? Who is the killer?" He smiled, a small, sad smile that held no triumph. "Patience, mon ami. Tonight, after dinner, I shall assemble the household and reveal the truth. But first, we must let the killer believe they have succeeded. We must give them rope, as you English say, with which to hang themselves." The solicitor, a thin, nervous man named Hartley, arrived at 3:30. Poirot closeted himself with the man for nearly an hour, emerging with an expression I could not read. "Well?" I demanded as soon as we were alone. "What did you learn?" "Everything, Hastings." Poirot's voice was heavy. "And nothing good. The truth of this matter is darker than I had imagined. A crime born not of sudden passion, but of 15 years' patient hatred. Tonight, justice will be served. But I confess, mon ami, that I take no pleasure in it." He would say no more, despite my persistent questioning. Instead, he asked Lady Whitmore to arrange for the entire household to gather in the drawing-room at 8:00. "I shall reveal the identity of Sir Roland's killer," he announced, "and I shall prove it beyond any doubt." Chapter 6. The gathering before noon. The drawing-room had been arranged with theatrical precision. Chairs were positioned in a semicircle facing the fireplace, where Poirot stood with his back to the flames, his small figure casting a long shadow across the Persian carpet. Inspector Dawson occupied a chair near the door, his notebook ready. I took my customary position by the window, where I could observe the assembled company. They filed in one by one, each face a study in carefully controlled emotion. Lady Whitmore came first, leaning heavily on her cane, her ancient dignity undiminished by the day's horrors. She settled into the largest armchair with the air of a queen taking her throne. Marcus followed, his dark features set in a mask of contempt. He sprawled in his seat with deliberate insolence, arms crossed, jaw tight. Vivian entered next, resplendent in black silk that caught the firelight like water. She chose a chair apart from the others, crossing her legs with studied elegance, her cigarette holder poised between manicured fingers. Philip came last among the family, his face pale and drawn, his hands never still. He perched on the edge of his seat as though prepared for flight at any moment. And finally, Eleanor. She entered quietly, as she did everything, and took the most modest chair, a straight-backed seat near the door, half hidden in shadow. Her gray dress blended with the dimness, her plain features composed. Only her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed any inner turmoil. Poirot surveyed them all, his green eyes moving from face to face with the unhurried patience of a man who holds all the cards. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "We are gathered to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath layers of deception, resentment, and long-nursed hatred. The murder of Sir Roland Whitmore was not a crime of sudden passion. It was the culmination of 15 years of patient suffering and patient planning." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "When I arrived at Whitmore Hall, I found a household at war with itself. Sir Roland had made enemies of everyone, his wife, his sons, his sister, even his mother. Any one of you might have wished him dead. Several of you had threatened as much." His gaze found Marcus. "Monsieur Marcus, you told your father you wished him dead, in front of witnesses." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Madame Vivian." Poirot turned to her. "You were planning to divorce him. You would benefit from his death, though perhaps less than you hoped." Vivian exhaled smoke in a thin stream. "I've never hidden my feelings, monsieur." "Monsieur Philip." The younger brother flinched at his name. "You had been embezzling from the estate. Your father knew. He was planning to have you arrested." Philip's face crumpled. "I didn't. I would never. And Mademoiselle Eleanor." Poirot's voice softened as he turned to the woman in the shadows. "You had perhaps the greatest grievance of all. 15 years of unpaid servitude, the loss of your youth, your prospects, your chance at happiness. And then the final humiliation, to be cast aside like a worn-out servant with barely enough money to survive." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "I told you all of this myself, Monsieur Poirot." "Indeed you did, with admirable honesty." Poirot began to pace slowly before the fireplace. "So we have 4 suspects, each with motive, each with opportunity. The question is, which one committed the crime?" He stopped, turning to face them. "Let us begin with what we know. Sir Roland was found dead in his study this morning. The door was locked from inside, the window latched. The police initially believed he had been poisoned by the cocoa that Mademoiselle Eleanor delivered at 10:30 last night." "A reasonable conclusion," Inspector Dawson interjected. "The sister made the cocoa. The sister had motive." "Reasonable, yes, but wrong." Poirot's voice sharpened. "The timing, Inspector, does not support this conclusion. Sir Roland's pocket watch stopped at 11:47. The glass cracked, suggesting a fall or struggle at that moment. If he had consumed cyanide at 10:30, he would have been dead within 15 minutes. Yet the watch tells us he was alive and moving over an hour later." A murmur rippled through the room. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, "the doctor's examination of the body revealed something crucial. Sir Roland was not poisoned through his cocoa. He was injected." "Injected?" Lady Whitmore's voice was sharp with surprise. "Oui, madame. A small puncture mark on his left wrist, barely visible. The poison was administered directly into his bloodstream using a hypodermic needle. The cocoa was untouched, a distraction designed to cast suspicion on the one who prepared it." All eyes turned to Eleanor. She remained motionless, her expression unreadable. So, the sister is innocent? Marcus's voice held skepticism. Someone else killed him? I did not say Mademoiselle Eleanor was innocent, Poirot replied carefully. I said the cocoa was not the murder weapon. These are different things. He resumed his pacing. Let us consider the method. An injection requires medical knowledge, not extensive, but sufficient. It requires access to both poison and hypodermic equipment. And most importantly, it requires proximity. The killer had to be close enough to touch Sir Roland's arm without arousing suspicion. Someone he trusted, I offered from my position by the window. Précisément, Hastings. Someone he trusted absolutely. Someone whose touch he would not question. Poirot turned to face the family. How many people in this room did Sir Roland trust in such a way? Silence answered him. I will tell you, none. Sir Roland trusted no one, not his wife, not his sons, not his sister. He was suspicious of everyone, especially after the incident with the poisoned coffee last week. Then how? Philip began. Patience, monsieur. We come to it. Poirot withdrew a folded paper from his pocket. This afternoon, I spoke with Monsieur Hartley, your father's solicitor. He brought with him the original will, the will that Sir Roland was planning to change today. He unfolded the document. The current will, signed 5 years ago, leaves the bulk of the estate to Marcus as eldest son. Despite his disinheritance in word, he remained the legal heir. Philip receives a smaller portion. Vivian receives a widow's settlement. Lady Whitmore retains her residence and allowance. And Eleanor? Lady Whitmore asked quietly. Mademoiselle Eleanor receives nothing. Poirot's voice was soft. A letter of thanks for her service, an expression of gratitude, but no money, no property, no security whatsoever. Eleanor's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a moment. I knew. I always knew. But this will was to be changed today, Poirot continued. Sir Roland had written to Monsieur Hartley with specific instructions. Marcus was to be cut out entirely. Philip was to be reduced to a pittance. Vivian's settlement was to be eliminated. And Eleanor, he paused. Eleanor was to receive the estate. The words fell like stones into still water. Everyone stared. At Poirot, at Eleanor, at each other. What? Marcus was on his feet. That's impossible. Father despised Eleanor. He treated her like a servant. He treated everyone with contempt, Poirot replied. But in his final letter to Monsieur Hartley, a letter received 3 days ago, Sir Roland wrote that he had come to appreciate the value of loyalty. He had decided that Eleanor, who had served faithfully for 15 years without complaint, was the only family member worthy of inheriting the Whitmore estate. The letter from London, I breathed. The official-looking letter Eleanor saw him reading. Oui, Hastings. A copy of his new instructions sent by Monsieur Hartley for Sir Roland's review before the formal documents were prepared. Eleanor's face had gone white. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea. But someone knew. Poirot's voice hardened. Someone read that letter. Someone understood that if Sir Roland lived until today, the will would be changed, and they would lose everything. Someone decided that Sir Roland must die before Monsieur Hartley arrived. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the room. The killer entered the study through the hidden passage from the butler's pantry. They had prepared in advance, oiling the rusty bolt, ensuring silent access. They waited until after Eleanor delivered the cocoa, knowing she would be blamed. Around 11 o'clock, Marcus said slowly. I heard voices from the Study. Two people talking. You did. Sir Roland and his killer. Poirot nodded. The killer engaged him in conversation, perhaps about the will, perhaps about family matters. Sir Roland was distracted, agitated. He did not notice when the killer moved close, touched his arm, pressed the needle into his wrist. But the injection mark was clean. Dr. Paulson interjected from his position near the inspector. No sign of struggle. He must have allowed it willingly. Or believed it to be something else entirely. Poirot's eyes glittered. A medical treatment, perhaps, an injection for his health. Understanding dawned on several faces simultaneously. Sir Roland suffered from gout, Poirot continued. Painful attacks that required medication. His doctor, you, Dr. Paulson, prescribed regular injections to manage the condition. Paulson nodded slowly. That's correct. I taught someone in the household to administer them, so Sir Roland wouldn't need to visit my surgery every week. And who? Poirot asked softly. Did you teach? The doctor's face went gray. Miss Eleanor. She's been giving Sir Roland his gout injections for years. Every eye in the room turned to the woman in the shadows. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her face a mask of stone. But something had changed in her eyes, a terrible resignation, a letting go. No, she said quietly. That is not quite right, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot tilted his head. Then enlighten us, mademoiselle. Eleanor drew a long breath. I did give Roland his gout injections. I have done so for 8 years. He trusted me for that, only that. And yes, I knew how to administer a hypodermic. I knew where the needles were kept, and the medications. She paused, her voice steadying. But I did not know about the will. I did not read the letter from London. I did not kill my brother. Then who did? Inspector Dawson demanded. Eleanor's gaze moved across the room, past Marcus, past Vivian, past Philip, and settled on Lady Whitmore. Mother did. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Whitmore sat rigid in her chair, her aristocratic features carved from ice. That is a grave accusation, she said at last, and quite absurd. I am an old woman, Eleanor. I can barely walk without a cane. You walk perfectly well when you wish to, Eleanor replied, her voice flat. I've seen you at night, moving through the corridors without assistance. The cane is theater, like everything else. Eleanor, Philip's voice cracked with distress. Let me tell you what happened, Mother. Eleanor rose, stepping out of the shadows at last. You intercepted the letter from London. You always collect the post first. You've done it for years, claiming it's your morning exercise. You read Roland's instructions to the solicitor. You realize that if the new will was signed, you would lose everything. Your residence, your allowance, your control over this family. Lady Whitmore's face remained expressionless. Speculation. You came to my room that night. You asked to borrow my medical kit, the one I keep for Roland's injections. You said you needed the scissors to trim your correspondence. I didn't question it. Why would I? You're my mother. More speculation. I heard footsteps at 11:45. Eleanor continued, her voice rising. A woman's footsteps, moving toward the study. I assumed it was Vivian. But Vivian was asleep, drugged by her sleeping powder. The footsteps were yours. I was in my room all night. You were in the study, killing your own son. Eleanor's composure finally shattered. You went through the passage you've known about for 60 years. You approached Roland while he sat at his desk. You told him you wanted to discuss the new will, perhaps to plead for better terms. He let you close. He didn't suspect you. Why would he? You're his mother, his frail, elderly mother who can barely walk. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. You took his arm. You administered the injection. You watched him die. And then you searched his desk for the letter, burned it in the fireplace, and scattered the papers to make it look like a robbery. You locked the study door from inside, left through the passage, and bolted it behind you. The perfect crime, with me as the perfect scapegoat. The room held its breath. Lady Whitmore sat motionless, her ringed fingers curled around the arms of her chair. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Clever girl," she murmured. "I always said you were the clever one." "Mother," Marcus's voice was strangled. "Oh, don't look so shocked." Lady Whitmore's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "Roland was a monster. You all knew it. He destroyed this family with his cruelty, his suspicion, his petty tyrannies. And when he finally decided to do something decent, to reward Eleanor's loyalty, he was going to destroy us all in the process." "So you killed him," Poirot said quietly. "To preserve your position. To preserve everything." Lady Whitmore's eyes blazed with sudden fire. "This estate, this family, this legacy, I have spent my entire life protecting it. I married a man I didn't love to secure the Whitmore line. I endured decades of subordination to my own son. I watched him break Marcus's spirit, humiliate Philip, trap Vivian in a loveless marriage. And I said nothing, because that was my duty." She drew herself up, regal despite her age. "But when I learned he planned to give everything to Eleanor, a spinster with no husband, no heirs, no ability to continue the Whitmore name, I knew I had to act. The estate would pass to strangers. Everything I sacrificed would be for nothing. So you murdered your son," Inspector Dawson said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "To prevent your daughter from inheriting? I murdered a tyrant to save a dynasty." Lady Whitmore's voice was cold with conviction. "I am not ashamed." Poirot regarded her with something approaching sadness. "And Mademoiselle Eleanor? You were content to let her hang for your crime?" For the first time, Lady Whitmore's composure flickered. "Eleanor would have been found innocent. The evidence was circumstantial. I made certain of that." "You made certain of nothing." Eleanor's voice shook with fury. "The cocoa, the timing, my access to the hypodermic. You built a case against me, step by step. If Monsieur Poirot hadn't discovered the injection mark, I would be in a cell right now. Eleanor, I never intended. You used me." Tears streamed down Eleanor's plain face. "You've always used me. My whole life, I've been a tool for this family's convenience, nursing, managing, sacrificing, and my reward was to be your scapegoat." Lady Whitmore closed her eyes. For a moment, she looked every one of her 80 years. "I did what I believed was necessary," she said quietly. "History will judge me as it will." Inspector Dawson rose, his face grim. "Lady Whitmore, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Sir Roland Whitmore. You have the right—" "I know my rights, Inspector." The old woman rose with dignity, refusing assistance. "I have been a Whitmore for 60 years. I know how to face consequences." She paused at the door, looking back at her family, at Marcus's shocked face, Philip's tears, Vivian's stunned silence, and Eleanor's grief. "I did love him, you know," she said softly. "Roland, despite everything, he was my son." Then she was gone, escorted by Inspector Dawson, leaving behind a family shattered by truth. Later, when the police had departed and the household had dispersed to their private griefs, Poirot and I stood in the garden, watching the winter sun sink toward the horizon. "You knew," I said. "From the beginning, you suspected Lady Whitmore." "I suspected everyone, Hastings, but certain details pointed to the truth." Poirot tugged at his mustache. The footsteps Eleanor heard, a woman's tread moving toward the study, the passage bolt, recently oiled by someone with long-time knowledge of the house, the burned letter, destroyed by someone who understood its significance, and most tellingly, the injection mark. "The trust," I murmured. Sir Roland trusted his mother. Précisément, the one person in this house he would allow to touch his arm, to approach with a needle, the one person whose medical attention he would accept without question. Poirot sighed. "It is a terrible thing, Hastings, when a mother kills her child, against nature itself. She showed no remorse. She showed conviction, which is perhaps worse." Poirot shook his head. "Lady Whitmore believed she was saving her family's legacy. In truth, she has destroyed it more thoroughly than Sir Roland ever could." We stood in silence, watching the light fade. "And Eleanor?" I asked at last. "What becomes of her?" "She inherits nothing from the old will, but Monsieur Hartley tells me that Sir Roland's final letter constitutes a valid codicil, a legal addition to the existing will. The courts will likely honor his final wishes." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mademoiselle Eleanor may yet receive what she was promised. Justice, it seems, is not entirely blind." "She deserves it," I said firmly. 15 years of service, and her own mother was prepared to let her hang. "Oui." Poirot's voice was soft with sorrow. "The human heart, Hastings, it is capable of great love and great cruelty. Often they are intertwined, like the roots of the same poison tree." He turned toward the house, his small figure silhouetted against the dying light. "Come, mon ami, let us leave this place of shadows. Our work here is done." And so concludes our tale of murder before breakfast, a story of family secrets, bitter inheritance, and the terrible price of misguided loyalty. Lady Honoria Whitmore stood trial at the Sussex Assizes and was found guilty of murder. She died in prison 6 months later, maintaining to the end that she had acted for the greater good. Eleanor Whitmore did indeed inherit the estate, as Sir Roland had intended. She sold Whitmore Hall and used the proceeds to establish a charitable foundation for unmarried women without means, ensuring that others would not suffer the fate she had so narrowly escaped. Marcus returned to London, where he eventually remarried, more happily than before. Philip overcame his gambling addiction and took a modest position with a shipping firm. Vivian, freed at last from her loveless marriage, traveled to the continent and was last seen in Monte Carlo, enjoying life on her own terms. As for Hercule Poirot, he returned to London and his comfortable flat, where order and symmetry reigned supreme. But sometimes, in quiet moments, he thought of Whitmore Hall and of a mother's love twisted into something monstrous. "There is no greater tragedy," he once told me, "than when protection becomes destruction, when the desire to preserve destroys everything worth preserving." The little gray cells, it seems, understand not only the mechanics of murder, but the broken hearts that drive it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through shadows and secrets. Until next time, this has been Agatha Christie Tales, reminding you that the truth, however dark, will always find its way to light. The End.